The square was silent, too silent. Rhett Hayes felt the weight of every watching eye on him as he stood at the edge of the crowd. His boots sank slightly into the red sand of Aridus Prime's central square, a hollow circle carved into the heart of the alien settlement. There was no sound but the rasping cough of a dying child, each wet, broken breath slicing through the stillness like a blade. The people of Aridus stood with their backs turned inward, forming a wall of indifference. It was their way, a ritual older than their written language. When the weak falter, the tribe turns away. No one stepped forward, no one spoke, and by their silence they condemned the boy. Rhett's hands tightened around the battered utility pouch at his hip. He had been on this world for 9 months, long enough to learn their customs, long enough to know that this was no accident. The boy's ribs strained against thin, dust-caked skin, and the hollowed eyes stared at nothing. He was maybe 6, maybe 7, alone, dying. And no one would lift a finger. "Do nothing," someone hissed from the crowd. "The law is clear." Rhett had heard those words before, on Earth in a refugee camp on Europa Station. During a reactor breach on Kythos III, when safety protocols demanded that 20 workers be sealed in to save the colony. He followed the law then, and he still saw their faces in his dreams. His breath came slow, controlled. He stepped forward. A murmur rippled through the circle. Heads turned, backs straightened. Eyes cold, predatory, furious, locked on him. "Stop," a woman snarled. "You break the circle, human." Rhett ignored her. He walked until he was beside the boy. The child's chest shuddered weakly. His lips moved, whispering something Rhett couldn't hear. Maybe a name, maybe a prayer. Kneeling, Rhett dug into his pouch. The last thing he had from the transport wreck, a ration bar, half-molded, dry as stone. Worth nothing, worth everything. He pressed it into the boy's trembling hand. "Eat," he whispered, "please." The reaction was instant. The air exploded with shouts. "He taints the circle. He poisons our strength. Death to the off-worlder." The crowd surged forward, a tide of fury and tradition, but the sound that silenced them wasn't their rage. It was the clang of a spear striking stone. The crowd parted like water. From their ranks emerged a figure every colonist knew. Kira, lawkeeper of Aridus, enforcer of ancient codes. She was tall, towering over Rhett even without her polished bone armor. Her skin was the color of cobalt, and her eyes burned like blue fire beneath the twin suns. She had executed men for less than this. "Prisoner," she said, voice cold as the desert wind. "By the law of the circle, you forfeit your life. Your blood will feed the sands." The crowd roared their approval. "Feed the desert, feed the desert." Rhett stood slowly, meeting her gaze. "I gave a starving child food. You gave weakness a chance to live. And what's wrong with that?" Her spear whipped up and the chain snapped around his wrists with a brutal finality. He was dragged away as the crowd spat at his feet. The bread lay crushed in the sand. Mercy turned to mockery. They marched through the desert under a sun that burned like a furnace. Each step bit into Rhett's feet, the chain between his wrists pulling tighter with every stumble. Kira walked ahead, her cloak whipping like a banner of authority. "Why," he rasped, "why kill a child?" "Because the desert demands strength," she answered without looking back. "We do not defy the desert." "That's not an answer." She jabbed his back with her spear. "I don't owe you answers, off-worlder. You came here. You live or die by our rules." He laughed, the sound dry and cracked. "I've seen cruelty dressed as tradition before. It always wears the same mask." Her stride faltered barely before resuming. 3 generations ago we were 10,000. Now we are 500. The desert grows. The water retreats. The weak drain what the strong need to survive. So you let children die. We let nature choose who belongs. At midday they rested beneath a jagged spire of stone. Rhett's wrists bled from the shackles. Kira watched him with gemstone-hard eyes. "Your compassion is a disease," she said. "It infects the tribe. The law cuts it away before it spreads." He looked up at her, sweat burning his eyes. "A law that lets children starve isn't strength. It's fear pretending to be power." Something flickered in her expression. A wound, a memory, then it was gone. "Silence," she snapped, but her hands tightened around her spear. The wind shifted, a dark line on the horizon. "Storm," she muttered. "We need shelter." By the time it hit, the sky was a wall of rust-colored sand and roaring wind. They stumbled into a ravine, pressed against the rock as the storm howled around them. Kira's cloak wrapped around them both, a small cocoon of warmth in the chaos. Their faces were inches apart. Rhett could see the tiny scar bisecting her left eyebrow, could feel her breath, ragged but steady. "Your brother," he said quietly. "How old was he?" Her eyes flashed. "I told you to be silent." "Was he sick, small? Was he left to die while the tribe watched?" Her hand shot out, gripping his throat. "You know nothing of my life." "I know loss," he croaked. "I know what it does, makes you believe if you're cruel enough you'll never feel it again." Her grip trembled, then released. The storm screamed. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Ate too small for his age. The sickness took his lungs." "What was his name?" "Kiv," she said, eyes distant. "He loved the blue stones that fall from the sky." "And now you enforce the law that killed him." "I enforce the law that keeps us alive." "Does it?" Rhett asked softly. "Or does it just make sure no one ever feels what you felt?" Silence, then enough. She turned away, but her spear arm shook. By nightfall, they were far from the settlement and far from mercy. A sound in the dark froze them both. "Wraiths," Kira hissed. "Don't move." Six-legged predators with obsidian eyes slithered from the rocks. They moved with predatory precision, silent, lethal. Kira's spear flashed, cutting one down, then another, but one leapt for her back. Rhett moved without thinking. Chains rattled as he hurled himself sideways. The creature's fangs sank into his side. White-hot agony exploded through him as he screamed. Kira spun, driving her spear through the beast's skull. Blood hissed on the sand. "Get up," she shouted. "More will come." "I can't," Rhett gasped. His limbs felt like lead. Poison burned through his veins. Kira scanned the dark horizon. There's a ravine ahead, deep enough to defend. She tore the beast's body off him, dragging him to his feet. Move or die. Each step was torture, each breath fire, but he moved. They stumbled toward the ravine, the night alive with unseen predators. And just as Rhett's legs gave way, his vision swimming, Kira caught him, and her lips were at his ear. "Don't die," she whispered. "Not yet." The world faded. And with it, so did the certainty in her eyes. By the time they stumbled into the shallow ravine, Rhett's vision was a flickering tunnel, narrowing with every heartbeat. His breaths came in short, ragged bursts, and each one felt like breathing molten glass. "Stay awake," Kira barked, half dragging, half carrying him toward a rock overhang. The cave was small, barely large enough for the two of them, but it offered cover from the blood-scented night. Rhett collapsed onto the cold stone floor. The impact sent a fresh wave of agony through his body, and he bit down a scream. The wound in his side pulsed, hot and wet. When he looked down, the bite was already turning black. "Wraith venom," he rasped. "Not good." "Silence." Kira tore a strip from the sack that once held his bread, the same bread that had condemned him, and pressed it to the wound. "You will not die here." Rhett's lips twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. "Because the law demands, I die at the canyon." Her eyes flicked up, sharp and unreadable. "Because I said so." The cave was too small for distance. Her knees pressed against his side as she bound the wound, and every brush of her fingers sent fire through his nerves. He could feel her heartbeat hammering as fast as his own. Outside, the night was alive with scraping claws and low, guttural growls. Wraiths, more than one. Dozens, maybe, drawn by blood, drawn by weakness. "Are they waiting?" he asked. "Yes," she crouched by the cave mouth, spear leveled toward the darkness. "They hunt in silence when they know their prey cannot run." "Smart things," Rhett whispered. "Smarter than us, maybe." "Be quiet," Kira hissed, though her voice lacked venom. "Save your strength." The hours stretched, each one heavier than the last. Rhett's body trembled uncontrollably as the venom spread. His hands were ice. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He drifted in and out of consciousness, time breaking into jagged shards. Once he dreamed of home, of Europa Station's steel corridors and the hum of machines beneath his hands. Of the first reactor he ever repaired, the one that saved 3,000 lives. Once he dreamed of failure, of sealed doors, screaming voices, and the 20 workers left behind to die because the law demanded containment. Then in the darkness, Kira's voice cut through the fevered haze. "Hold on." It wasn't a plea, it was an order. Her hand pressed over his where it rested limply against the stone. He felt her strength there, steady, unyielding, and he clung to it like a man drowning. By dawn, the wraiths were gone. The sky blazed copper-red through the ravine's narrow opening. Kira crouched beside him, inspecting the wound with a soldier's precision. "The poison spreads," she muttered. "By midday, it will kill you." "Then we better move fast," Rhett croaked. "You can't walk." He laughed weakly. "Not an option, lawkeeper." She stared at him for a long time, jaw tight. Then, without another word, she slid an arm under his shoulders and lifted him. Rhett grunted, every muscle screaming in protest. "What are you doing?" "My duty." "Which one? The one that says I die at the canyon, or the one that says the weak must fall?" "Both," she said flatly. "You will reach the canyon, you will fall there if you must." But the way she shifted his weight, the way she shielded him from the burning sun with her own body, betrayed something deeper, something she refused to name. The desert grew crueler with every step. The soft dunes hardened into jagged plains of salt-cracked earth and razor-sharp stone. Heat shimmered off the ground in waves, turning the horizon into a mirage of molten gold. Rhett's breath came in short, shallow gasps. The poison throbbed with every heartbeat, spreading fire through his veins. Hours passed, twice he collapsed. Twice Kira hauled him up again. "Move your feet," she growled. "I will do the rest." "Why?" Her silence stretched for long moments, broken only by the rasp of their boots in the sand. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know." By late afternoon, Rhett's legs buckled for the third time. He hit the ground hard, dust billowing around him. "Get up," Kira ordered, but there was no edge in her voice now, only something that sounded dangerously close to fear. "I can't," he whispered, "not anymore." She stared down at him, spear clutched tight. The law was clear. If he could no longer walk, she was to leave him. Let the desert claim the weak. Let nature decide. But she didn't move. Something had changed in the night, in the shelter of that tiny cave, with the storm howling outside and her memories laid bare. Something had cracked open in her heart. Slowly, she knelt beside him, slipped an arm beneath his shoulders and lifted. "What are you doing?" he asked again, barely conscious. "My duty," she said softly, "a new one." Together, they stumbled forward. It was no longer a march, but a crawl, two broken beings leaning on each other, refusing to stop. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in crimson and gold, the land ahead shifted again. A cloud of dust, a line of shapes on the horizon. Kira froze. "Riders," she said. Rhett squinted through bleary eyes. Dozens of them mounted on tall, six-legged desert beasts, banners whipping in the wind. And at their head, a figure he recognized from whispered warnings and fearful glances back in the settlement. "Draxus," Kira muttered, bitterness coating the name. "The Council's hammer, he's come for judgment." The riders encircled them within minutes. Draxus dismounted slowly, a predator savoring the moment. His armor was carved from blackened bone, his spear longer and sharper than Kira's. His voice, when he spoke, carried easily over the desert wind. "You look weaker, Kira," he said, circling them like a vulture. "A prisoner at your side, a wound at your ribs, the Council will be displeased." "He is for judgment," she replied, her voice flat. "I bring him as the law demands." 3 days, Draxus sneered. "The journey must be completed in 3 days, and yet here you are late." There was a storm. "Excuses," the word was taken up by the crowd. "Excuses, weakness, excuses." "And what is this?" Draxus gestured at Rhett, barely standing. "You bear his weight, he should crawl to his death." "He is wounded," Kira said, jaw clenched. "Then you admit it," Draxus boomed, turning to the crowd. "You kept him alive when nature said he should die. You broke the law." A roar rose from the assembled warriors. "Traitor, weak blood." Rhett could feel Kira trembling beside him. Rage, despair, shame. "Your concern is touching Draxus," she said coldly. "One might think you've been waiting for this moment." A flicker of calculation passed across his face. "I serve the tribe. When a lawkeeper fails, it is everyone's concern." "And if the lawkeeper dies," Kira said quietly, "there's a vacancy to fill. How convenient." The tension snapped taut. Warriors shifted, hands on weapons. The crowd's chants faltered. "Careful," Draxus warned. "Your words approach treason." "Do they?" Kira raised her voice. "Or do they approach truth?" The crowd rippled with unease. And then, like a blade through cloth, Kira's next words cut the world apart. The wraiths that attacked us, they don't hunt this far from the wastes. Not unless something drove them. Gasps murmurs, eyes turned to Draxus, his face darkened. You dare accuse me before witnesses, he spat. I challenge you here and now. The chant rose again, this time a war chant. Challenge, challenge, blood for the law. Kira's knuckles whitened on her spear. Rhett's vision blurred. He felt his strength slipping away, life draining into the sand beneath his feet. And then, through the haze, he saw the truth. Kira wasn't just fighting for his life now. She was fighting for something far greater, for a future that might never come if she lost. His fingers closed around the last crumb of bread in his pocket, the bread that had condemned him, the bread that had started all this. He let it fall. Then, with a roar born of agony and defiance, Rhett hurled himself forward, chains swinging, and slammed into the nearest warrior. Spears stabbed, dust rose, the world dissolved into chaos. And the last thing Rhett saw before darkness claimed him was Kira, standing over him, eyes wide with something he had never seen there before. Fear, not of death, but of losing him. Rhett hit the ground hard. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through his poisoned body, but he didn't care. The world was spinning, a whirlwind of sand, shouts, and spears, but somewhere in that chaos he saw Kira's face. Shock, fury, and something else she would never name. The warriors reacted instantly. Spears plunged down like silver serpents. Chains rattled as Rhett swung his bound wrists wildly, a desperate, clumsy defense, steel-kissed skin. Blood sprayed crimson across the sand. Stop, Kira roared. But the crowd was beyond reason now. The human had broken the ritual. The sacred judgment was tainted. There was only one answer to blasphemy, death. One spear struck his shoulder, another his thigh. His knees buckled and he crumpled, choking on his own breath. He fell face first into the sand, blood pooling beneath him, staining the desert red. The chant died. Silence swallowed the square. Every eye turned to Kira. She stood motionless, spear trembling in her grip. Around her, the warriors waited for her command to finish it, to spill his blood, to end the shame he had brought upon them. But she didn't speak. Instead, she knelt beside him. Why, she whispered, voice shaking, why would you do this? Rhett tried to speak, but blood bubbled at his lips. His eyes met hers, and that was enough. She saw the answer there. He had done it for her to break the cycle, to show her that mercy was not weakness. Draxus stepped forward, triumphant. See, he shouted. Even the off-worlder knows her weakness. He chose death rather than watch her fall. The position of lawkeeper is mine. No. The word was soft, quiet, but it sliced through the air like a blade. Kira rose slowly, turning her back to Draxus, and the tribe gasped. No lawkeeper ever turned their back during judgment. It was a sign of surrender, of vulnerability, but she didn't care. She knelt again, and this time she placed her spear into Rhett's bloodied hand. The weapon, symbol of law, power, judgment, now rested in the hands of the condemned. You knew, she whispered, her voice breaking. You knew what this would make me see. Rhett's breath shuddered, he couldn't speak, but his eyes answered for him. Kira stood and turned to the crowd. Her face was carved from steel and sorrow. Touch my spear and live, she said, her voice rising to carry over the silent assembly. Gasps, cries, rage. The words were forbidden. Blasphemy. To offer life where death was demanded was to defy the very foundation of their world. But she didn't stop. He gave mercy to a dying child, she shouted. And for that we condemned him. We call ourselves strong, yet we tremble before a child's cough. We fear the mercy in our own hearts more than the desert itself. Treason, Draxus roared, his spear raised. She betrays us all. I uphold the true law, Kira roared back, the one we forgot long ago. The crowd's unity splintered. Some screamed for her death. Others murmured in confusion, doubt creeping into their faces. The old wounds were opening, memories of children left to die, of loved ones cast aside in the name of strength. My brother died because of the law you worship, Kira shouted. How many of you have lost someone? How many children sacrificed to a false strength? Silence her, Draxus bellowed. But the silence was already broken. A voice from the crowd, old and frail, rose above the chaos. She speaks the truth. An elder stepped forward, her blue skin pale with age, her eyes glistening. I remember the old ways before fear ruled us, before the circle, before we forgot mercy. Draxus spun on her face twisted with rage. Stay out of this, Elder Mira. But others were stepping forward now. Parents, siblings, people who had buried too many loved ones in the name of strength. Their voices joined the elders, uncertain but growing. And Draxus saw his control slipping. With a roar of frustration, he lunged, spear aimed at Kira's heart. The world slowed. Rhett's eyes snapped open. He was barely conscious, barely alive, but he saw the blade descending. Instinct overrode agony. His arm, trembling, blood-soaked, rose to meet the attack. Clang! Metal struck metal. The force drove Rhett to his knees, but he held the spear between them. Draxus stumbled back, snarling. "You're already dead, off-worlder," Draxus spat. "Not yet," Rhett gasped, "and neither is she." Kira moved beside him, one hand on his shoulder. The contact grounded her and ignited something deep inside. "I challenge your interpretation of the law, Draxus," she said, her voice steady. "Here, before witnesses." "You have no standing," he sneered. "You gave your spear to an off-worlder." "I chose compassion," she countered. The crowd murmured, blood debt, an ancient concept older even than the circle. A life saved demanded repayment in kind. "He saved my life from the wraiths you sent," Kira declared. "By the old laws, that creates a debt." "Lies," Draxus hissed. "Truth," the elder said firmly. "Blood debt is real, older than culling, a life for a life." Confusion rippled through the tribe. Certainty cracked. The unshakable pillars of their law trembled. And Draxus, sensing the shift, made a desperate choice. With a roar, he attacked again, not Kira this time, but Rhett. The wounded human raised his spear, but his strength was gone. He would never block the blow. But before the blade could reach him, Kira intercepted. She caught the spear shaft with her bare hands. The impact drove her to one knee. Blood ran from her palms, but her grip did not falter. "The law is for life," she snarled through gritted teeth, "not for your ambition." With a twist that defied reason, she wrenched the weapon from his grip and flung it aside. Now armed, she stood between Rhett and Draxus, her spear leveled. "I claim the right of challenge," she shouted, "not for position but for truth." The crowd formed a circle, the arena for ritual combat. Tension hummed in the air like a living thing. It was no longer about leadership. It was about the soul of their people. "Victory comes with blood or surrender," Elder Mira intoned. "The law will judge." Draxus circled her like a predator, spear knife now drawn, a cruel grin splitting his face. "I've waited for this," he hissed, "since the day you were chosen instead of me." "This was never about the law," she said, matching his movements. "Only about power." "The law is power." He lunged, blade flashing toward her throat. Kira parried, her spear shaft sparking against steel. She countered with a thrust, but he dodged easily. "Too slow," he mocked. "Too weak, just like your brother." The words hit harder than any blade. With a cry of rage, Kira attacked, each strike faster, sharper, fueled by fury and grief. Draxus retreated under the assault, but she was burning herself out. The poison in Rhett's veins wasn't the only poison here. Hatred ate at them both. Minutes passed, her attack slowed, her defense faltered, blood splashed across the sand, hers. "Yield," Draxus commanded. "Yield, and I might let you live in exile." "Never." "Then die with your off-worlder." He charged, blade aimed straight for her heart. And then a flicker of movement, sand arcing through the air. Not at Draxus. At Kira's feet. Her boot slipped on the shifting ground, a stumble deliberate and perfectly timed. Draxus' strike missed, his momentum carrying him forward. Kira pivoted and slammed the butt of her spear into the back of his knee. Crack! The sound echoed across the circle. Draxus howled and collapsed. Before he could rise, Kira's spear pressed against his throat. "Yield," she said, her voice like thunder. "Yield and live." "Kill me," he spat. "It's the only way this ends." "No," her voice shook with something deeper than rage. "Death is not the only answer. That's what I'm trying to change." She pressed harder, blood welled beneath the blade. "Yield," she whispered, "and live to see a different way." The silence stretched, and then slowly Draxus dropped his knife. "I yield," he snarled, "but this changes nothing. The tribe will never follow you." The crowd stirred, some shouting for his death, others falling into uneasy silence. Something fundamental had shifted. They had seen mercy, and they could not unsee it. Kira turned, spear still in hand, and knelt beside Rhett. His skin burned with fever. His breaths came shallow and uneven. "He is dying," she announced. "Poison. He saved my life from the creature's Draxus scent." She looked out at her people, at the faces torn between fear and hope. "By the old ways, by the blood debt, I am bound to try to save him. Who will stand with me?" For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then a small figure stepped forward, the boy Rhett had saved with a crumb of bread. "I stand with you," he called. "He gave me food, he broke the circle for me." The crowd gasped, and for the first time in generations, the circle cracked. Silence, for one long heartbeat, no one spoke, no one moved. The only sound was Rhett's ragged breathing and the faint whistle of desert wind. Then Elder Mira stepped forward. "I remember the old ways," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "Before fear consumed us, before we believed that survival meant cruelty," she turned to Kira, "I stand with you." The dam broke. One by one, others joined her. First a mother whose child had died under the Circle's law. Then a father who had buried his frail son alone in the desert. Then warriors, then elders, until the crowd was split in two, some still loyal to Draxus and the old ways, others drawn to the new path Kira had dared to name. But none of it mattered if Rhett died. "We need the yellow moss from the Cave of Echo," Kira said, urgency in her voice. "It's the only thing that counteracts wraith venom." "That's a day's journey," someone protested. "Then we run." Kira didn't wait for permission. She knelt, sliding her arms under Rhett's limp body. Despite his weight and her exhaustion, she lifted him as if he were nothing. "We don't have much time," she said, already moving. Some followed Elder Mira, the boy, a few warriors. Others shouted after them, calling them fools, traitors, heretics. But Kira didn't stop. She carried Rhett away from the canyon, away from judgment into the unknown. The journey blurred for Rhett. He drifted in and out of consciousness, pain and fever twisting his perception into shards of memory and dream. He remembered Kira's face hovering above him, blue skin slick with sweat, eyes hard with determination. He remembered voices, arguing, encouraging, singing, but couldn't make out the words. He remembered the feel of the desert wind on his face, the sting of sand against his skin. And always he remembered the boy's voice, high and clear. "He gave me food. He broke the circle for me." They reached the Cave of Echo as the twin suns dipped low, casting the cliffs in deep crimson light. The entrance was hidden, a jagged fissure at the base of a sandstone pillar, half buried by centuries of shifting dunes. Inside, the air was cool and damp, a rare blessing on this brutal world. Kira laid Rhett gently on the cavern floor, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. "Stay with me," she whispered, brushing sweat from his forehead. "We're not done yet." The cave walls glowed faintly, lit by patches of bioluminescent moss that pulsed with soft golden light. The air was thick with the scent of minerals and moisture life in a place that should have been barren. "There," Elder Mira said, pointing to a cluster of moss high on the cavern wall. "That's what we need." Kira scaled the rock with practiced ease, scraping handfuls of the yellow moss into a pouch. Back on the ground, she ground it into a thick paste with water from her canteen and pressed it into Rhett's wound. "Breathe," she whispered. "Fight." The paste burned like fire as it touched his skin. Rhett's body arched, a strangled cry tearing from his throat. Then he collapsed, his breathing shallow but steady. "Will it work?" the boy asked, wide-eyed. Kira stared down at Rhett, her jaw tight. "If the poison hasn't gone too far." The hours crawled by. Kira didn't sleep. She didn't move from Rhett's side. She bathed his fevered skin with damp cloths, checked his pulse again and again, forced bitter draughts of moss tea down his throat even when he gagged. She talked to him about Aridus, about the stars, about her brother Kiv, anything to anchor him to the world. And when she thought no one could hear, she whispered words meant for no ears but his. "You were right," she murmured, her voice cracking. "I've enforced a law I knew was wrong. I told myself it was necessary, that cruelty kept us alive. But every time a child died, I saw Kiv's face. Every time we turned our backs, I remembered the circle." She brushed a strand of damp hair from Rhett's forehead. "You showed me another way, and I will not let you die for it." 3 days passed in a haze of fever and half-consciousness. Kira's followers returned with supplies, water, and news. The tribe was fracturing. Draxus had rallied those loyal to the old ways and declared Kira a traitor. Civil war seemed inevitable, but others, many others, were questioning everything they had believed. Some want to join us, Elder Mira said. Others want to destroy us. The tribe is divided. Then we will be two tribes, Kira said grimly. Two ways of life. Let the desert decide which survives. Rhett stirred, his voice a hoarse whisper. Or you learn from each other. Kira's head snapped toward him. His eyes were half open, fever-bright but aware. Two tribes, he murmured, don't have to be enemies. You share knowledge, share strength. Optimistic, she said softly, a small smile touching her lips. From a dying man. True, he breathed, and still worth trying. The fever finally broke on the fifth night. Rhett woke to find Kira sitting cross-legged beside him, grinding more moss into paste. Her face was haggard from lack of sleep, her armor stained with sand and sweat. But her eyes, those cold, fire-bright eyes, softened when they met his. You live, she said simply. Disappointed, he croaked. Her smile was faint but real. Not today. He tried to sit up and failed. Pain lanced through his side, but it was a dull ache now, not the burning fire it had been. He was weak, weaker than he had ever felt, but he was alive. Thank you, he whispered. Kira shook her head. No, thank you. When Rhett was strong enough to stand, leaning heavily on a carved staff, Kira led him to the mouth of the cave. The view took his breath away. Before them stretched the Judgment Canyon, a vast scar carved into the desert, its layered walls painted in bands of red, ochre, and gold. Far below, a thin ribbon of water glimmered like silver. It was beautiful and terrible all at once, a place of death and now, perhaps, rebirth. This is where I was meant to execute you, Kira said quietly. And instead, Rhett asked. Instead, we build something new. They stood together in silence, watching the canyon glow under the rising suns. For the first time since his arrival on Aridus, Rhett felt something he hadn't dared hope for, purpose. But the moment didn't last. A shout echoed from deeper within the cave. A warrior stumbled in, breathless. Riders, he gasped. Draxus people, many of them, less than an hour away. Kira's expression hardened. Prepare the defenses. Rhett turned to her. You should hide me. No. Kira. He grabbed her hand, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. This is just your fight anymore. It became mine the moment I broke the circle. For a heartbeat, she said nothing, then she nodded once. Then we face it together. They gathered their small band, warriors, elders, children, the sick and the weak, those who had chosen compassion over culling. They were few, barely 100, but their hearts burned brighter than any blade. We do not seek battle, Kira told them as they took positions along the canyon rim. But we will not surrender our belief that strength and mercy are not enemies. Rhett stood beside her, spear in hand, no longer a prisoner, but an equal. The chains that had once bound him had been melted down, reforged into arrowheads and tools, weapons for defense, instruments of change. Far across the desert, a dark line crested the dunes. Hundreds of riders, banners snapping blood-red against the wind. Draxus rode at their head, spear raised high. Whatever happens, Kira said, her voice steady and strong, we have already won. We chose a new law, one that honors life. Rhett stared into the approaching storm and felt no fear. Whatever came next, blood, death, or peace, humanity had already done what it always did best. It had changed the game. The desert was silent. Not the quiet of peace, but the heavy, waiting silence before a storm breaks. Kira stood at the canyon's edge, spear in hand, the wind tugging at her cloak. Around her, a ragged line of warriors, elders, and children watched the horizon. Some clutched weapons with trembling hands. Others simply stood, their faces hard with resolve. They were outnumbered at least 5-1, but none stepped back. Rhett adjusted the grip on his spear. The metal was still warm, forged from the chains that once bound him. Now it felt like a promise, a defiance. They're too many, whispered one of Kira's warriors, a young woman barely past adolescence. Kira didn't take her eyes off the approaching riders. Numbers don't decide everything. The desert has seen armies fall to storms, giants felled by a single crack in the earth. We will stand. The rider column grew larger, closer, a black tide of banners, armored mounts, and glinting steel. At their center, unmistakable even from a distance, was Draxus. His cloak snapped in the wind like a banner of war. "They're slowing," Rhett murmured. Kira nodded. "They're not charging." The realization settled over the defenders like a strange relief and deeper unease. If Draxus wanted blood, he had enough warriors to drown them before noon. But he didn't attack. He approached. At the canyon's lip, the enemy force halted. Dust swirled around their mounts, cloaking them in a red haze. Then, to everyone's shock, Draxus dismounted. Alone, limping slightly from their last battle, he began the long walk toward Kira and her people. The two leaders met halfway across the rocky plain. Behind them, two civilizations, one clinging to the past, one daring to build a future, stared each other down in taut silence. "Lawkeeper," Draxus called, his voice carrying across the empty space. "I no longer claim that title," Kira answered evenly. "I follow a different law now." "So I've heard." His tone was unreadable, not mocking, not hostile, just tired. "You speak of mercy, of compassion." "I do." Draxus's gaze shifted to Rhett, standing a few paces behind her. "And of off-worlders who think they know what's best for us." Rhett didn't flinch. "I never claim to know what's best, only that better is possible." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the dry rasp of desert wind. Then Draxus sighed. "You are few," he said quietly. "Too few. The desert is merciless. It will test your ways, crush them." "All ways are tested here," Kira replied. "But we face those tests together, not by sacrificing the weak." For a long moment, Draxus said nothing. Then he looked down, jaw working. "3 nights ago, my sister fell ill, desert fever." Kira's eyes narrowed, and... "By the old law," he swallowed. "She should have been left to die, but I couldn't." The admission hung between them, heavy as the desert sky. Behind Kira, Rhett felt something shift, the faintest crack in Draxus's armor. "I remembered," Draxus continued, "the off-worlder giving bread to a dying child. I remembered your words about fear wearing strength's mask, and I chose differently." "Your sister?" Kira asked softly. "She lives." The crowd behind her stirred. Even among Draxus's warriors, murmurs rippled through the ranks. "And now?" Kira asked. "And now," Draxus said, his voice rough, "half my people wish to join you. The other half would kill me for breaking the law." Kira's breath caught. "You wish to join us?" "I wish to survive," he corrected, "and perhaps survival demands change." The tension that followed was thicker than the storm clouds that sometimes swallowed the horizon. Behind Draxus, warriors shifted uneasily. Behind Kira, people exchanged wary looks. The line between enemy and ally was blurring, and no one was sure whether to embrace it or fear it. "Your off-worlder has changed things," Draxus said, nodding toward Rhett. "Whether for better or worse, I cannot yet say." Rhett stepped forward, leaning on his staff but standing tall. "Change is always terrifying, but stagnation kills slower and deeper." "Big words," Draxus said, "but words don't feed bellies, they don't stop storms." "No," Rhett agreed, "but neither does letting children die." For a moment, Draxus looked as though he might strike him down. Then slowly he laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "You speak like a fool, and yet the desert remembers fools who changed worlds." He turned, gesturing to the riders behind him. "They have chosen, packs not weapons, supplies not spears, many wish to stay." True enough, as the dust settled, it revealed the truth. Among Draxus's ranks were not only warriors but families, mothers with infants, elders leaning on staffs. They had not come to kill. They had come to join. The merging of the two groups was not a celebration. It was a negotiation, awkward, tense, and cautious. Some of Kira's people spat at the newcomers, refusing to share food or water. Some of Draxus's warriors sneered openly, muttering that mercy would doom them all. There were fights, brief, ugly clashes in the night that left bruises but no corpses. But there were moments of hope, too. A hunting party composed of both factions returned with more food than either had ever gathered alone. Children from opposite sides played together, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. An elder from Draxus's group shared a forgotten technique for drawing moisture from sand, saving dozens of lives. Piece by piece, a fragile new society began to form. Rhett watched it all from a rocky outcrop overlooking the canyon. His wounds still ached, but his strength was returning. He traced the scar at his side, a mark of wraith venom and survival, and fingered the scrap of cloth that had once been his bread sack. He had kept it even now, a reminder of how this all began. Kira found him there as dusk bled into night. She moved with the same quiet grace she always had, but there was something new in her posture, a looseness, a freedom. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, settling beside him. He smiled faintly, just thinking. "About what?" "How a single act of kindness can start an avalanche." "Or a war," she murmured. "Maybe both." They watched in silence as campfires bloomed below them like scattered stars. Voices rose, some angry, some joyful, some uncertain. It was messy, imperfect, alive. "What happens now?" Red asked. "We adapt," Kira said. "We innovate. We share burdens instead of discarding those who carry them." Her fingers brushed his, a small gesture, but one heavy with meaning. "We find strength in connection instead of isolation." "It won't be easy." "No," she agreed, "but nothing worth building ever is." Then a horn blast shattered the night. Rhett was on his feet before he realized he'd moved. Kira's spear was in her hand, her eyes scanning the canyon rim. "What is it?" he demanded. A scout stumbled into view, panting. Riders, many of them from the west, not ours. Kira's face hardened. "How many?" "Dozens, maybe hundreds." Rhett felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "Draxus's rebels." "No," the scout said. "Worse, raiders from the outer wastes, slavers." A hush fell over the canyon. Old enemies had become uneasy allies, and now a new threat was descending on them all. Kira turned to Rhett, her expression grim but resolute. "We've barely begun to build this new world." "And now," Rhett finished, tightening his grip on the spear, "we'll have to fight for it." The night wind howled across Judgment Canyon, carrying with it the metallic scent of coming blood. The raiders came from the west, wild riders from the outer wastes, nomads who had outlived drought, famine, and war by taking what they needed from others. They wore bone armor and ragged cloth dyed in the dark ochres of blood and rust. Their mounts were lean and fast, bred for long hunts and brutal charges. They carried spears tipped with jagged metal, crude plasma pistols, and hooks meant for taking slaves. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to conquer. Kira stood on the ridge above the canyon, her cloak whipping around her like a flag. Around her, their fledgling alliance prepared for war. Warriors from both sides worked side by side, faces drawn and determined. Former enemies now passed water skins and sharpened blades without a word. Old hatreds had no place here, not with a common enemy at their gates. "How long?" Red asked, stepping up beside her. 2 hours, maybe less," Kira replied. "They move fast." "Then we make them slow." He turned and walked back to the line of defenders, not soldiers, but farmers, herders, mothers, fathers, elders. Fewer than 200 of them against what scouts estimated to be 500 raiders. By the old math, they were already dead. But Rhett had other calculations in mind. "Listen up," he shouted, climbing onto a boulder so they could all see him. "We can't match their numbers, we can't match their weapons, but we don't need to." Dozens of eyes, human and alien, turned toward him. Fear glimmered in many, determination in a few, but they were listening. "They expect us to fight them like warriors. We're not going to. We'll fight them like engineers." He pointed toward the canyon walls, tall, jagged formations carved by centuries of sand and wind. "We don't have a wall. Then the land becomes our wall. We don't have siege engines. Then we build them." Rhett held up a small, fist-sized device, a crude fusion of scrap metal, salvaged battery cells, and scavenged plasma cores. "Pressure charges. Set these along the canyon rim. When they charge through the pass, we'll bring the rocks down on them." A ripple of excitement moved through the crowd. The plan was risky, but it was possible. "Next," Rhett continued, pointing toward the canyon floor, "we dig pits, shallow enough to hide, deep enough to trap their mounts, line them with spikes, scrap anything sharp, force them to split, to slow, to scatter." "And if they still come?" asked one of Draxus's warriors. Rhett smiled grimly. "Then we give them a surprise they'll never forget." He motioned for Kira to bring forward a large, tarp-covered structure. When she yanked the cloth away, a collective gasp rippled through the defenders. It was a weapon, crude but deadly. A massive torsion launcher, built from scavenged springs, cables, and the frame of an old ore lifter. Mounted atop it was a barrel that could hurl containers of volatile fuel hundreds of meters. Firebombs, Red explained. We light the air itself against them. If they breach the canyon, they'll walk into a storm of fire. Kira's jaw tightened. You've built a killing field. Rhett met her gaze. I've built a chance. The hours before dawn passed in a blur of feverish preparation. Warriors planted charges along the canyon rim, hiding them beneath loose stone. Others dug traps along the floor, disguising them with sand and brush. Women and elders mixed fuel, sealed it in clay jars, and stacked them near the launcher. Rhett moved among them, checking lines, adjusting charges, recalibrating fuses. His fingers were raw and bleeding by the time the first light of dawn crept across the horizon. Kira found him crouched over a detonator array, tightening a wire with trembling hands. You've done enough, she said. Not yet, he muttered, refusing to look up. Rhett, her voice softened. If this fails. It won't. He looked up at last, his eyes burning with quiet intensity. It can't. She studied him for a long moment. I used to think strength was how many enemies you could kill. And now I think it's how much you're willing to protect. They shared a brief, fierce look, not lovers, not yet, but bound by something deeper. Then the horn blew. The raiders came at dawn. They swept over the dunes like a living storm, hundreds of them, banners streaming, war cries rising to the heavens. Their mounts thundered across the sands, and the ground shook beneath their charge. Hold, Kira shouted, raising her spear. The defenders crouched behind hastily built barricades, shields and weapons ready. The air buzzed with tension. Every breath was a countdown. Steady. The first wave hit the traps. Mounts screamed as their legs broke on hidden spikes. Raiders tumbled into pits, their charge stumbling and slowing. Confusion rippled through the horde. Now Rhett roared. The canyon walls exploded. Rocks and debris rained down, crushing riders and mounts beneath avalanches of stone. Entire sections of the raider vanguard vanished under tons of rubble. Those who survived veered wildly to avoid the falling death and slammed into more traps, more chaos. Fire the launcher, Rhett shouted. The first clay jar sailed high into the sky, trailing a streak of burning fuel. It crashed into the raider flank and erupted in a searing wall of flame. A second followed, then a third. The canyon became an inferno. The raiders faltered, but they did not break. Forward, bellowed their warlord, a towering brute in bone-plated armor. For the wastes, for the taking. They surged again, climbing over their dead and wounded. Plasma bolts rained against the defenders' barricades. Spears whistled through the air. Fall back to the second line, Kira ordered. The defenders retreated in disciplined waves, drawing the enemy deeper into the canyon, deeper into Rhett's trap. More charges detonated, collapsing bridges and narrowing the field. Raiders were forced into choke points, where defenders waiting with spears and slings cut them down. But still they came. By midday, the battle had devolved into brutal, desperate fighting. The raiders had breached the canyon mouth. The defenders were exhausted, bloodied, and outnumbered. For every raider they felled, two more seemed to appear. Rhett stumbled back from the barricade, his arm bleeding from a plasma burn. We're losing ground. Then we hold the ridge, Kira shouted, rallying her fighters. We hold it or we die here. She leapt into the fray, her spear a blur of motion. Rhett followed, swinging a scavenged blade with more desperation than skill. Around them, the defenders fought like demons. Farmers turned warriors, elders turned soldiers. A raider lunged at Kira from behind. Rhett hurled himself into its path, taking the blow on his shoulder. Pain exploded through him, but he didn't stop. He jammed a detonator into the raider's chest and slammed his fist on the trigger. The explosion tore them both from their feet. When the dust cleared, Rhett was lying in the sand, blood pouring from a gash in his side. Kira was above him in an instant, hands pressed to the wound. Stay with me, she shouted. Stay with me. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. I told you we'd make them slow. Her jaw clenched. Don't you dare die on me. But the battle wasn't over. A new roar rose from the raider ranks, a fresh wave, larger than any before, surging toward the ridge. The defenders were barely holding. The line was about to break. Fall back, someone screamed. We can't hold them. Kira looked down at Rhett, then back at the advancing horde. The choice was brutal and clear. Save him or save them all. The canyon burned. Smoke turned the rising sun to a blood-red smear above the chaos. The defenders were exhausted, many bleeding, all pushed back to the final line of defense, a ridge of jagged stone overlooking the settlement they had sworn to protect. The raiders were coming. Again. And this time there would be no fallback, no second plan. This was where they would stand. Or fall. Kira knelt beside Rhett, her hands slick with his blood. It pulsed through her fingers, hot and relentless. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale beneath the grime. The explosion had shredded his side, bones splintered, muscle torn. The venom wound from weeks ago had been nothing compared to this. "Stay with me," she whispered. Her voice trembled, betraying a fear she hadn't shown once in her life. "You can't die, not now." Rhett's eyes fluttered open, glassy and distant. "Told you we'd make them slow." She almost laughed, almost. "You stubborn, impossible human." Another blast rocked the canyon. The barricade below them shattered under the weight of the raiders' assault. Warriors screamed. Plasma fire turned stone to glass. The line was breaking. "Kira," someone shouted, "they're almost through." She looked from Rhett's fatting eyes to the approaching tide of enemies, hundreds of them, howling unstoppable. She couldn't save both. "Go," Rhett rasped. His voice was barely a breath. "They need you." Tears streaked the dust on her cheeks. "No." "Kira," he tried to smile. "You showed me what strength is, now let me show you." His hand slipped from hers, falling limp to the ground. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Then Kira stood. Her legs trembled, her heart screamed to stay, but she stood. She turned toward the ridge and raised her spear high. "Form the line," she roared, "with me." The defenders gathered, beaten but unbowed. They formed a thin, ragged wall of shields and spears. Mothers stood beside warriors. Children too young for war carried stones and blades. Draxus himself, once their enemy, limped to Kira's side, blood staining his armor. "This is madness," he said through clenched teeth. "It's hope," Kira answered, "and it's all we have." The raiders came, a black tide cresting the ridge. They screamed their savage war cries, certain of victory, certain of slaughter. And they met something they had never known before. They met unity. The clash was apocalyptic. Metal rang against metal, spears shattered against shields. Fire burned flesh and stone alike. The defenders fought not for conquest, not for glory, but for each other, for a future, for the fragile dream that mercy could mean more than death. Kira moved like a storm through the enemy ranks. Her spear flashed in deadly arcs, every strike deliberate, every motion fueled by something deeper than rage. She wasn't fighting for tradition anymore. She was fighting for change. Beside her, Draxus roared commands, driving his warriors into tighter formations. Farmers fought like soldiers. Children threw firepots from the cliffs. Elder Mira, too frail to fight, sang the old songs of the tribe, hymns of strength and endurance that carried over the battlefield like a prayer. Still the raiders pressed on. Still the line buckled. And then a sound no one expected. "To me." The voice was weak but fierce, familiar, human. Kira spun. Rhett, impossibly, was standing. Barely. His face was ashen, blood soaking the sand beneath his boots. But he was there, a spear clutched in trembling hands. He stumbled forward, joining the line. "Didn't I tell you?" he gasped, grinning through the pain. "I don't die easy." A cheer erupted from the defenders. It wasn't loud. It wasn't strong. But it carried something the raiders had never heard before: defiance. "For the children," Kira shouted, driving her spear into the ground. "For the living," Rhett answered, raising his weapon skyward. "For mercy," the crowd roared as one. And they surged forward. The battle shifted. The raiders, so certain of victory, began to falter. Their charges broke against the unyielding wall of desperation and hope. Their war cries turned to confusion, then to fear. This was not how prey fought. This was not how the weak died. This was something new. Rhett's mind blurred with pain, but his hands moved with purpose. He tore a charge pack from a dead raider's belt, wired it to a spear, and hurled it into the densest cluster of enemies. The explosion blew a crater in their formation. "Push," Kira screamed. "Push them back." The defenders surged forward, driving the raiders step by step toward the canyon mouth. For the first time, the invaders retreated, not from strength of arms, but from strength of will. It ended as suddenly as it had begun. Their leader, the bone-armored warlord, fell beneath Kira's spear, his lifeless body tumbling into the canyon below. With his death, the raiders broke. Some fled into the desert. Others threw down their weapons and surrendered. Silence fell over Judgment Canyon. A silence of disbelief, of exhaustion, of victory. Kira stood among the bodies, chest heaving, blood streaking her skin. Around her, her people, their people, stared at each other, too stunned to cheer. They had done it. Against all odds, they had survived. And then she heard it. Kira. She turned. Rhett was on his knees, his spear clattering from numb fingers. He swayed once, then crumpled to the ground. Rhett, she screamed, falling to her knees beside him. His breathing was shallow, his pulse weak. Too much blood lost, too many wounds. Even the moss paste would not be enough this time. Stay with me, she begged, cradling his face. Stay, you promised. His eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain but also peace. We did it. No, she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. You did it, you changed them, you changed me. He smiled faintly, not me, us. His hand reached for hers, weak, trembling, and she took it, pressing it to her chest. You're not allowed to die, she whispered, not after everything. Then he breathed, each word a struggle, touch my spear. Kira froze. His voice, broken, fatting, was the echo of a promise made long ago. Touch my spear, he whispered again, and live. Her heart broke, and yet she understood. This was no command, it was a choice. She gripped the shaft of his weapon, pressing it to his chest. If life must take someone, she said softly, let it be me. No, he started, but the words died on his lips. Her breath shuddered, her eyes closed. And then, impossibly, his chest rose, stronger, steadier. Her hand fell limp. The canyon was silent once more, this time not with fear but with awe. Rhett's eyes fluttered open, clear and sharp. He gasped a lungful of air and stared at the woman lying motionless beside him. No, he whispered, no, no, no. He cradled her head in his lap, his tears falling into the dust. You can't, not you, not like this. But she did not stir. Days passed. The dead were buried with honor, the wounded tended. The raiders who surrendered were offered a choice, exile or a place among them in a society that would never again leave a child to die. And atop a windswept cliff overlooking the canyon, a pyre burned, not as a funeral but as a beacon. A new law had been written in blood and sacrifice. It read mercy as strength. Weeks later, Rhett stood alone at the cliff's edge, watching twin suns rise over the desert. The settlement below was growing, new shelters, new wells, new families formed from those who had once been enemies. He traced the scar across his side, a reminder of venom, of war, of love. Beside it, wrapped in cloth, was Kira's spear. He carried it always, a promise, a memory. You were right, he murmured to the wind. One act of kindness can change everything. He looked up as footsteps approached. Elder Mira joined him, her eyes misty. The council has decided, she said. The new settlement needs a name. Rhett raised an eyebrow, and they want you to choose. He looked out over the desert, the land that had nearly killed him and given him purpose. Then he smiled, soft and sad. Call it Kiv, he said, for the boy who died, for the girl who lived, and for the woman who taught us that mercy is worth dying for. That night, as the stars came out over the canyon, a single meteor streaked across the sky, a shard of blue fire falling to earth, just like the ones Kiv had once collected. Rhett watched it burn, and in that moment he knew. Kira was still with them. In the wind, in the stars, in the new world they were building, one where strength and compassion walked hand in hand. And humanity had done what it always did best. It had changed everything.